Okay, so now we're going to look at the triangular trade. I know you guys watched a short video to explain it, but we're going to look at it a little bit more in depth here. Now, you just drew a map a few minutes ago on the last slide where you were just supposed to draw arrows between the three continents to show what the triangular trade route looked like. So we're going to use this same slide and we're going to start in Europe and we're going to show the first leg of the triangular trade. So I'm going to start here. So from Europe to Africa, the traders would start in Europe because in Europe that was kind of the center of civilization in the 1500s. That's where all the cities were. That's where factories were. That's where you got all of your stuff from. That's where grocery stores were and shops and markets. And so you were looking for something already made that you didn't have to make yourself. You got it from Europe. So this was the first leg of the triangular trade from Europe to Africa. And the ships would leave Europe and they would travel along Europe, down the coast of Africa, and they would go down to the west coast, and they would land somewhere down here in this region of Africa. Now, when they would come from Europe to Africa, they would bring with them manufactured goods. Manufactured goods is a fancy way of saying stuff that is already made, like we would buy from Walmart or the grocery store, stuff that people didn't have to make themselves. Now, specifically, the people in Africa were very interested in European guns and ammunition and European clothing. So the two big things that Africans wanted from Europe were guns and clothes. So that's what Europeans would send to Africa. Now, when they got to Africa, then they would trade with the Africans for people. This is where the slave trade begins because Europeans realized very quickly that the Africans who live on the west coast of Africa, they already practice slavery. They take other African tribes as slaves, and they're willing to trade these human beings for trade goods from Europe. So on the ships from Africa, then the Africans would trade other Africans to the Europeans, and then the second leg of the triangular trade would start. And that second leg went from Africa to most of the time to North America, but also to different places in South America and maybe even in what we call now the West Indies. And the second leg was called the Middle Passage. Okay, now the ships would leave Africa, they would travel to North America, and they brought with them one major trade good, which was people, labor source. Now, the reason that slaves came from Africa and the reason that this is super important to us is that this starts in America, this slave trade that lasts until the Civil War in 1861. So from the 1600s until 1865-ish, we have slavery in America. Now, the slaves came from Africa, and the reason that the Americans in general, were looking for slaves is because they needed people to work the farms, the plantations that were growing up in North America. Okay, so the slaves would come from Africa, they would come to North America, they would work to grow products that then the North Americans would send to Europe. So then we look at the third leg of the triangular trade, which went from North America to Europe. And this last leg was the ships traveling from North America to Europe, and they would take raw materials. Now, the things that the slaves helped grow mainly were cotton and sugar, especially in the southern part of the United States and in the West Indies. And then also they helped cut down trees and send lumber to Europe. Because remember, Europe is the only place in the 1600s that has factories and cities. And so they're the place that we're going to get all that manufactured, ready-made stuff from. So, but they didn't have as many forests or trees, and they didn't have as much land to grow cotton or sugar, especially, and even they didn't have really good weather for that. So they needed to get cotton and sugar and lumber from somewhere else. So this is how these three different parts of the trade route are connected, because Europe needed stuff from North America, North America needed slaves from Africa, and Africa wanted the manufactured goods from Europe. So all three of these legs of the trade were connected.